Hello, everyone. It's Carl Smith on Podcasts for the People. Tonight we are joined by Antarctic adventurer, snowy scientist Stan Felton, who's here to give us some icy insight on the frozen continent. He's on the phone now. Hey, Stan. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks. How about yourself?
I'm great, Stan. Now, tonight's section is about survival in Antarctica, and you are a surveyor and scientist that specializes in the Antarctic region. What are some of the main, big geographical aspects you can tell us about that cold continent?
Well, Carl, I can tell you that the area is 5.3 million square miles, which is roughly 1.5 times larger than the United States. On top of that, only 44,000 square miles aren't covered by ice, which is about 0.32% of the total landmass.
Wow, Stan, that is a lot of ice. Now, once again, tonight's topic is focused around Antarctic survival, and a big part of survival in general is the land on which you live. So, Stan, tell us about how much of that landmass could man potentially inhabit?
Well, Carl, that is a very interesting question. The classic geographic division of Antarctica is East Antarctica and West Antarctica. East Antarctica is a much larger section of land, but it's also much colder than the West. Out of the 67 occupied research bases on the continent, only 26 of them are in East Antarctica. Also, the United States Amundsen Scott Base is at the exact location of the South Pole, and that's the closest to the center of Antarctica. The average temperature during the winter is negative 76 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this is a very cold temperature, but our cold weather technology allows us to easily combat that.
Well, sorry to interrupt, Stan, but what is the lowest recorded temperature in Antarctica, and is it still manageable with our cold weather technology?
Good question, Carl. The lowest recorded temperature on Earth was from the Russian Vostok station. It was charted at negative 128.6 degrees Fahrenheit. We certainly can combat that temperature with modern cold weather gear, but that equipment is still really expensive. Anyway, because of cold weather gear, the freezing temperatures at the coldest points in Antarctica are not going to be a huge issue for living purposes. However, the largest problem for living on this continent is the ice. The ice of Antarctica is constantly changing and shifting, creating rifts and ridges everywhere. The issue here is that many of these frozen formations are incredibly dangerous to all life on the continent.
Now, what do you mean by that, Stan?
Well, Carl, think of it like this. A team of dogs and their sledman could very easily step on a crack in the ice, causing a chunk of ice the size of a city block to collapse from underneath them. What I'm saying is that the ice is incredibly dangerous, and we can't really see what's underneath the visible layer. In East Antarctica, the average ice thickness is 7,300 feet. That is almost 1.5 miles of canyons, tunnels, holes, and cracks that can all shift and change with a single footstep. It's a massive risk to have communities and thousands of people moving on this ice. So to answer your initial question, Carl, we really do not know how much of Antarctica's landmass is inhabitable.
One other thing, Stan. You gave the ice thickness statistic for East Antarctica, but what about the western section?
The average ice thickness of West Antarctica is roughly 4,500 feet. Also, because West Antarctica is much smaller and most of the research bases are there, we know that the ice is much more safe due to the massive amounts of travel across the ice and the amount of scientific research being done there.
That is a positive step forward. Now, I understand the danger of the changing ice, but theoretically, if we say that all of the ice is safe, what would you say about the amount of inhabitable land?
I believe that all the land, except for the Transantarctic mountain range, can be inhabited.
And why not the mountains?
We can't inhabit the Transantarctic mountain range because it's a spot that we know will collapse. Due to the weird formations of ice and the intense glacial flow there, we cannot step foot in that region without running the very, very high risk of going through the ice.
Thanks, Stan. Now, building off my last question and leading me to my next one, what other problems are we going to encounter if we inhabit Antarctica?
Well, Carl, like I said, the ice is going to be a huge issue. But besides that, the main issue we're going to have includes resources.
Now, what kind of resources are we talking about here, Stan?
I'm talking about resources like food, water, power, and communication. However, communication has been sorted out already by use of radio and long-range cell phone towers. Also, Antarctica is home to 90% of the world's ice, including 70% of the world's freshwater ice, which we can easily turn into drinking water. Also, food is not going to be a huge issue because it just needs to be shipped down to the continent to be effective. The only major problem we're going to have with resources, Carl, is power.
Stan, hold on a second. If there are already research bases on the ground, shouldn't these power resource problems already be sorted out?
Well, Carl, you may think that, and your thoughts are right. But these power resources are only for 3 to 4,000 year-round residents. This power could not be used for millions of potential residents that could land on the continent of Antarctica. The major forms of power we could use to fuel this continent are wind power and tidal power, but both of these methods have major pitfalls.
Now, Stan, what would those pitfalls be?
Well, Carl, I'll start with wind power. Wind power is very effective in Antarctica because it's very windy down there. In fact, the fastest recorded world gust was down there, at 154 miles per hour. The problem with wind power, however, is that the cold temperatures damage the generating systems on these turbines. The solution could be find a cold resistant material to make the turbines, but that's a very low priority in the grand scheme of things. Tidal power also could be utilized because of the large amount of coastline in Antarctica, but the floating ice masses and the shifting ice of Antarctica can be very hazardous to these very expensive power systems.
Seems to me like this power conundrum could really be an issue. Now, Stan, before we wrap things up and send you off, what is your final answer to the question of whether or not mankind could survive Antarctica?
To be honest, Carl, this is a decision that has to be made when it comes down to the time when we have to utilize Antarctica for our survival. As of right now, it doesn't seem like the efforts necessary to survive Antarctica are worth our time and our resources.
Well, Stan, thank you for coming on. It has been a pleasure for you and your knowledge to have been shared with us here tonight.
Thanks, Carl. I'm glad to have made it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stan Felton. That's it for tonight, everyone. Make sure to tune in soon for more podcasts in the future. As always, I'm Carl Smith, and thank you to listening for Podcasts for the People. Have a nice night.